Who really decides the fate of a war? The politicians who declare it, the soldiers who fight it, or the civilians who live with its consequences? We often imagine power traveling from the top down, but in every modern conflict, something profound happens in the opposite direction. Although politicians command policy and the military executes strategy, it is the civilians who ultimately determine whether conflict is politically viable, financially sustainable, and morally legitimate. Wars only continue when the public is willing to pay for them, support them, and believe in them. Elected officials hold enormous formal power. Congress funds the military, executives authorize force, and legislators frame foreign threats. But this power is not independent, it is entangled. Ronald Cox describes how policymakers are tied to a sprawling military-industrial network, a constellation of interests that ties large bureaucracies and defense firms to foreign policy. Threats are not just discovered, they are shaped in this network. According to Cox, the military-industrial complex is embedded in a network of corporate and bureaucratic interests that shape threat perception. Politicians act within pressure from institutions, contractors, and economic priorities. Yet, even here, they cannot ignore the public. Their policies may be shaped by elite interests, but their survival depends on votes. The military controls tactics and force. Officers decide actions on the ground, but they do not decide how long a war lasts. They do not decide whether the public accepts casualties or whether resources continue to flow. Civil military scholars warn that tension always exists. As Florence Gobb notes, civilians formally control the military, but the armed forces possess the monopoly of collective violence. Effective defense requires cooperation, not domination. Even victory means little if citizens no longer support the fight. Public opinion is often the invisible brake on war. Tim Hazebrook's analysis of European military operations found that during the Libya intervention, public opinion acted as a constraint on executives. Leaders could not escalate simply because they wanted to. Voters mattered. This constraint is strongest when threats are unclear. Hazebrook concludes that when danger is ambiguous, citizens become skeptical, and intervention stalls. Civilians, through polls, protests, and elections, place limits on political ambition. War is expensive. Military strategy is not just written by generals, it is financed by taxpayers. Christopher Simon and Nicholas Lovrich show that support for military spending is not random. It reflects beliefs about trust, threat, and political values. When trust fails, spending fails. When threat perception collapses, so does the willingness to sacrifice. This cycle is visible from Vietnam to Iraq. As public patience wears thin, politicians reverse course, budgets shrink, withdrawals begin. No nation can sustain a prolonged conflict once it loses the people. Legitimacy is not generated in a war room. It is generated in homes, classrooms, churches, news outlets, and online spaces. The research shows why. Philip Verwimp and colleagues emphasize that conflict dynamics depend on the incentives and constraints shaping interaction between the civilian population and armed actors. Civilians are not passive. They are coping, resisting, supporting, and demanding. When enough citizens say, "Stop," wars stop. This is not idealism, it is political reality. Politicians declare wars. The military fights in those wars. But citizens decide if that conflict keeps going. They decide if it is worth paying for, if it should continue. Every war needs public support. If the public stops believing, the war begins to lose its strength. When people lose trust or feel the war is too unfair or costly, their voices matter. They vote, they protest, they speak out. Leaders can't ignore that forever. Even the strongest government has to listen when enough people say the same thing. Every war is ultimately a contest for public acceptance. When that acceptance ends, so does the war.